So I want to talk about forgiveness and forgetting and eventually not judging at all. My first teacher, Jim, who I talk about in my books, he was the first person to really say this to me. He said, it's not about forgiving. It's about never judging the person to begin with. And philosophically understood, that's a beautiful thing to live by. But in the real world, people hurt us. There's abuse. There's really horrible things that happen. So how do you not judge that? How do you actually live that in a day-to-day life? So I just want to tell you a story. A friend of mine, she had a really tough life. She was raised in a family, single mom, 3 sisters, and there was a lot of abuse, drugs, alcohol, the whole thing. Her mom used to choose her favorite child, and the two of them would gang up on the other ones and be really merciless, to the point that amidst all the abuse and everything that went on, the children don't speak. They live within an hour and a half of each other. They're in their mid to late 50s and 60s, and they haven't spoken in decades. A real shattering of a family, just based in abuse and tough life. So my friend, by the time she was a teenager, she was into drugs and alcohol and living in the streets and partying and coke and the whole thing. And she had a pretty angry perspective on the world. Hated her mom. Just hated everything. Her dad left when she was 16, or left when she was really young with the 16-year-old babysitter. And so she was pretty angry at God and everybody. So this went on, married an abusive husband, had a difficult time with children, the whole thing, And then later on in her life, she found out her mother's actual story. So it turns out that my friend's mother, see, this is a long time ago. My friend's in her late 50s, so if you imagine how long ago this was. Her mom was the oldest of 3 children. And from the time she was, 2, 3 years old, she and her brother and sister were pimped out by her mom and dad. And this went on. They didn't go to school. They were kept at home and just used for money. And then around the age of 12, the police came in to take them away. So you can imagine how horrible this was at the time. The police came in, took the parents away. Well, the children were terrified. And my friend's mom wouldn't speak. She just shut down and she just stayed silent. So those who were taking care of them and assessing the children decided that her mom, there was something wrong with her mentally. So they put her in an insane asylum. And she lived there for the next 20 years, heavily medicated, shock treatment, the whole horrible experience, abuse. It was a really terrible place. She eventually escaped because she fell in love with one of the orderlies, who turned out to be my friend's father. But he also was abusive. And of course, this girl had never known anything else, so she believed it was normal. They got home, they got married, had more babies, because of course the girl had no idea how these babies kept being made. And eventually, the father left with the babysitter. And this woman, who had essentially had 0 healthy life experience, only abuse, was now left to raise these children. And it really didn't go well. The moment my friend heard this story, she forgot her entire childhood. She didn't forgive her mother. Her childhood disappeared. It was irrelevant now. The compassion that she felt for her mother somehow deleted her entire childhood experience. I've had this a million times. You meet someone and they act a certain way, or they're harsh, or they're mean, or they're angry, or they're whatever. They have road rage, and we go, oh my gosh, and we throw some judgment their way. But if we're ever lucky enough to get to know them, and we understand their story, and we understand how they got that way, it doesn't matter. You might still comment that maybe road rage isn't a great idea, but we don't judge them anymore. In fact, we defend them to people who judge them. So the foundational love that connects us is agape. And the way this works is complete non-judgment. This is what connects every single person on the planet. But this is the hardest part, because we're raised in a society of judgment. But imagine every person you met, you knew that if you knew their story, their actions would be irrelevant. Imagine, what if this person who's so cruel and so offensive has a story like my friend's mom? Would we still judge them? Because we wouldn't be any different if we were in their shoes. So it's just an interesting way to consider this idea of forgiveness. That there's nothing to forgive, because if we knew their story, we wouldn't judge them to begin with.